Morning guys, I'm over by the bees this morning because I've noticed that you guys are absolutely loving all the bee content on our homestead and on our channel. So I wanted to share with you today all of the things that I learned in my very first few months of being a beekeeper, how much it costs to get started with all of the equipment that we needed the first little while. We got our bees in springtime, so it was swarming season, and so it was very easy to get free bees, but it did mean we had to upgrade all of our equipment pretty quickly, and so that's what I want to share with you guys today. The very first thing I did when I wanted to get bees and I decided that it was time to get a swarm for our homestead is I needed to register with the DPI, which is our local state council that's responsible for biosecurity and knowing exactly what diseases are going around. So by registering the fact that you have bees, you're making sure to keep not only your bees safe from diseases and other things that happen, but also all of the bees in the area. And so it's your responsibility to register. So you get a number for your hive that you're supposed to put onto all of your equipment, and that way you know exactly whose bees they are, and if anyone needs to check on them, then you know you've done the right thing. Oh, my chair just fell back. That's so embarrassing. The next thing you need to do for your bees and for yourself as well, and I highly recommend it, is find your local beekeeping club. By contacting my local beekeeping club, they were able to talk me through catching my first swarm, making sure that I was doing the right things when I was inspecting it for the first time. And anytime I had any questions about what I was seeing or what to do, I was able to contact pretty much like a mentor in that group. So someone who didn't mind me contacting them with all of my questions, and they get back to me and help me out as best as they could. And the coolest thing about everyone in the club is that everyone is super passionate and excited about beekeeping. So it never feels like a bother to ask them for help. Now, I know the question you're all dying to know, and that's how much it costs to start out with bees. I know that a lot of the channels on YouTube that I personally follow that are quite large and therefore have a great audience and great videos are usually based in places like Canada or America, or places that don't quite relate to Australia in the way of costs of things. Getting something shipped from America just doesn't make sense because the shipping fees are just so high to get them over to our little island. So I want to share with you guys the costs of starting out with my bees, and I wanted to share my very first hive with you to do this and talk you through the costs. Some of my parts were DIY, so I had to actually put the base of my box together and put the legs on it before I painted it. So it did come out a little bit cheaper because it wasn't pre-assembled, but these are my costs, and I'll flash up exactly what these costs cover. $250 and then $115. So I spent $360 for all of the equipment that I would need first off. And within a week, I spent another $150 for my next level, so the next super box. And I think within a month, maybe a couple of months, I then had to upgrade my bees so that they both had 2 extra boxes on top, and that cost me another $300. So in my first year, I have already spent, is it $800? Close to it on my bees. My bees were free because I was on the swarm list as part of my local beekeeping club. And so they notified me when someone in the area had bees that had swarmed, and I was able to go over there and catch them. I highly recommend to have someone that has experience to help you catch your first swarm. So I was really lucky that the lady who had the swarm of bees that we collected from had a neighbor who kept bees, and he had the time to come over and help me catch the bees, and he talked me through it and helped me out and just gave me confidence that I wouldn't have had by myself. And so I returned the favor again when our bees swarmed and we had those 2 little swarms in our trees, as you saw. I helped one of our friends' dads to come over and catch those 2 swarms. And again, without me talking him through it and knowing what I was doing and feeling comfortable around the bees, because I had been with them for so long already, I don't think he would have felt as confident, and he may have made more mistakes than he would have liked. And bees like to sting if you're mean to them or if you're quite abrupt, so it's better to avoid that if we can. By the way, the sun is like really brutal right there. Look at that. So I'm sorry if I've got some crazy shades going on. My very first setup was this first box down here, the base, the lid, and I have a queen excluder in the middle, which is here. But that was all I needed at the beginning as far as my hive went. So to catch my swarm, I needed a box to put them in, and inside this box, there's 8 frames which have a wax foundation on them. My last video on bees showed me actually putting the wax foundation into the frames before putting them into the box. So if you're curious how to do that and the machine that I borrowed from my beekeeping club to do it, then that's a really cool video to watch, and I'll make sure to link it down below or up high or somewhere wherever people put links. Another thing that I got for my bees as a first-time beekeeper is a beetle trap. So beetles are a really common thing that happen to our bees here, and if you do see beetles in your inspections, it's a really good idea to squish them. But what the beetle trap does is when the bees want to trap a beetle, they actually walk them over to the trap. The beetle falls into the diatomaceous earth, which is a fossil powder. We used to use this on our pigs to kill the mites on them. So the same thing, it works for beetles, and it just means that they die in there and they don't bother your bees. I was also recommended to get a sugar syrup feeder, and the feeder that I got is plastic. You fill it up with equal parts sugar, water, dissolved. So dissolve some sugar. Normal white sugar is what you're supposed to use, not brown sugar, raw sugar, anything like that. Normal white sugar, normal water, ideally tank water or distilled water so that you don't have the chlorines in it. Dissolve the sugar, and then that is food for your bees as they start to settle and establish themselves into a new place.
So that lip at the end gets inserted into the entrance of the hive and then pushed over to the side, and then it drips down onto that little tray for the bees to drink.
Now, if you watched our videos, you know that this hive that we have right here was super strong. And so what ended up happening is within a few days of having that sugar syrup there, I noticed my bees were performing so well and growing so quickly that they ended up wanting to swarm again, and I kept finding queen cells in their hive. So I personally wouldn't recommend the feeder unless you're getting your bees at a point in the year where pollen and nectar is quite low. So in autumn and winter, you might consider putting a feeder on to establish your new hive. But as far as spring and summer during swarm season, when all the beautiful flowers are out, these bees can already look after themselves pretty well. The hive we caught was huge, so it was already well established, and the queen was an absolute champ. So during summer and springtime, and if you catch a big swarm, I recommend maybe steer clear of the sugar syrup, especially for a week, but maybe in the cooler months, give it a go. A great way to check if your bees are well established or whether they need some sugar syrup is to see whether they're bringing in pollen. You can see the little bags of yellow on their legs. That's the pollen that they're bringing in, and that means that they're strong enough to look after themselves without needing to drink the sugar syrup. They do advise that if you're giving them sugar syrup, you continue giving it to them for a week. So if you are going to consider giving them sugar syrup, know that you're about to spend a bit of money on 7 kilograms of sugar and having to replace it each day. As I said, my first hive was very strong. Within a week, they were ready to swarm again. And when bees swarm, it is your responsibility as a beekeeper to catch them or to find someone who's going to catch them too. Honeybees are fantastic to pollinate flowers, to help trees and plants grow, and fruit as well. But if you let your bees swarm very often, one, they might bother your neighbours, especially if you live in a city or a suburb. Two, they might occupy hollows in trees, which actually prevents our native animals from being able to occupy those places as their homes. So then honeybees become a problem to our native animals, which isn't great. So by catching your swarms, you're staying responsible, you're making sure that they have a safe place to be, any diseases and things you can manage because you're watching them all the time, and you're not allowing it to spread further out where you can't see. So within a week, when my bees did end up swarming, I had to quickly get another box full of 8 frames. So I have 8 frame Langstrom hives. The Langstrom hives, which are these ones, are the standard ones, and they're the easiest for a new beekeeper. They're pretty no fuss. There's no special parts or fiddly things that you have to deal with. A lot of people do go for the flow hive because of that easy extraction. The flow hive is pretty cool because you don't have to go through the mess of extracting honey, but honestly, you'd probably still have to clean those tubes every now and again. So I feel like there could be some cons to having that. The Langstrom hive is pretty self-explanatory and easy. You don't have to extract honey until you're ready to. The bees will use that during their autumn and winter. All the honey in these hives is actually stored resources for the bees. So as a beekeeper, it's a really good idea to have 2 boxes that are dedicated just to your bees. One at the bottom is their brood box, where the queen can lay eggs, make lots of babies so that the hive can replenish itself and never die off. And then the top box, that second box there, I have a full frame one for these bees, and I have an ideal box which is half the size for my other bees. And what I'm letting these bees do with these 2 boxes is completely fill them with honey that is going to get them through the cooler months and the months where the flowers drop off or there's not as much pollen and nectar around. Then the third box you put onto your hive, that's usually the box that you can harvest your honey from. So the bees over there, my very original hive, I will most likely grab a few of those frames and extract honey from them, while these guys I will leave with their resources so that they are safe and comfortable over the cool months. As far as where to put your bees when you get them, you want to give them a nice sunny place. Bees love sun, but during the hot season, it is a good idea to have some shelter for them, so having trees around is going to be a great thing for them. In winter time, if you're in a cold place, you might have to protect your bees by adding in extra insulation or covering it up. In really hot places and very dry places where you get direct sun most of the time, you might want to consider covering up the hives to give them a little bit of shelter. I've seen people using foil foil insulation, which detracts the sun away and allows the bees to stay cool inside of their hive. But bees are pretty clever and they actually know how to look after themselves pretty well. They fan their wings to cool things down inside of their hive, like cooling off the honey before they cap it. So they do know how to look after themselves. They can insulate their hive by closing it off with that substance that they create. So your bees are going to be pretty clever, but there's always ways that you can help them, especially if you have chosen to put them somewhere that's not ideal for them. Some other things that I got for my bees was a hive tool. This is super important. This is your number one friend when you're doing an inspection, and that's because the way that this is shaped, it helps you to pry open the lids, which the bees put a natural sticky substance in between the lid and the box to keep everything closed and insulated. So this is your way to crack open that lid so that you're getting rid of that sticky stuff and you're able to actually pull it apart so you can do your inspections. It's also really handy. It's got this little, what would you call that? It's got a little leg that helps you to pick up the frames. So there'll be times where your bees are very busy, or maybe they're a little bit protective because they've got lots of great resources to look after, or they're still establishing themselves and they don't know you quite well. So by having a little leg like this, if your bees are piling up in one end and you can't actually lift the frames up with your fingers, it's a really good idea to have this because you can just pull it under and none of the bees are going to get hurt and your fingers aren't going to get stung if that's what they choose to do. I mean, you can see how close I get to my bees. I'm about 1 meter away. I can get even closer, and often I do to take footage of my bees going in. I'm also super curious to see how they bring pollen in. Must be egg laying time. So bees are naturally very friendly creatures and they're gentle and they just do their own thing. They're busy looking after their hive and themselves. So often they won't bother you unless you're bothering them. And in that case, you do need a bee suit with some gloves and a mesh hat. Depending on the season and how your bees are feeling, whether they're feeling safe or something's going on, they are going to get cranky and they will sting you. So if you've got anaphylaxis, I really do encourage that you make sure you have your EpiPen on you during all inspections. I don't think there's been one inspection where I haven't at least gotten one sting. And so if you're someone whose life is in danger because of these stings, please take precautions. The last thing we want to happen is for you to get hurt. The number one person to look after is not the bees, it's always you. But I did want to show you the two suits that we have. This is the basic suit that I have, and it is really thin, one cotton material, so it's really not that thick, and through this I have had a few bee stings, but they're not so bad. It does have a mesh hat on top that sits on my head, and because of the brim, it allows it to sit off my face rather than on it, which is a lot more comfortable. It just zips up, long sleeves, one piece means no bees are going to get into any gaps, or when you lift things up, you're not going to expose any parts of your skin. So a whole suit is highly recommended. I've already heard of a few neighbors that only have a jacket and have had a few stings around their hips. Now with Sam's suit, this is one that we spent money on and we bought it from Oz Armor. This is a much thicker suit. I think it is a double layered mesh suit, and I wonder if you can see, yeah, so you can see through it. So it is very breathable compared to the cotton. You don't have to wear as many layers under this. My suit, because it's only one layer, I do have to wear long pants and a long sleeve top, otherwise the bee stings are going to get through. This one you can kind of get away with it, but you probably want to steer clear of not wearing too much under it anyways, just in case. But because it's a little bit thicker, it's harder for the bees to get through, so this is going to protect you a lot better than a one layer cotton suit will. Again, it's a full body suit, so you don't have any gaps, and the hat on this one's a little bit different. It's like a fencing hat, which, I mean, I don't know, it's a personal preference. Sam prefers this hat. I don't mind either way, but yeah, that's what it is. My gloves look like this. Again, they are just one layer. This material is like a canvas material, so I guess it's a little bit hard for the bee stings to get through. And then this is a soft leather, so again, bee stings harder to get through. So these will keep you safe. Gloves are probably essential. I would not inspect my hives without gloves. Maybe one day if I'm crazy enough to feel confident, but for now, gloves are a number one thing. So is a suit, because I don't really enjoy the bees flying into my face. It can feel really uncomfortable, and so a suit just keeps them away and keeps you feeling a lot safer. To protect yourself, also, people recommend getting a smoker. In my first few weeks doing my inspections, a smoker, I would say, was 100% one of my favorite things that I needed to use, because it made me feel safe. So the smoke actually calms the bees down. They smell the smoke and they think that there's a fire or they're in danger, so their natural instinct is to consume as much honey as they can, and because their tummies are so full and satisfied, they often become very lethargic, or they're busy eating the honey, and so that way they don't bother you as much. That's the idea of the smoke. But I've noticed with the smoke that I just don't like the way that it makes my bees act. I understand the concept of what it's supposed to do, but I don't like stressing out animals when I don't have to. So as I got more confident with my inspections, I actually started using the smoke less and less, unless I really had to. So if I was going in for just a normal checkup, or just to see how much honey was in the frames or anything like that, I usually wouldn't use smoke in the very last few weeks that I've done it. But with this hive started building into their lid because I didn't give them enough space. They outgrew their space pretty quickly as well. And so when I had to destroy all of that honeycomb they were building into the lid, they got pretty mad the next day. And so smoke was almost necessary, because otherwise I got lots of stings. Another tool that I got recommended was a brush. And the idea of the brush is that you brush away the bees if they're in the way, but I don't tend to use it that often. The bees are pretty good if you're quite gentle as you're putting bits and pieces down, then most of the time they'll wiggle out of the way or fly off. So I haven't been using the brush as much, and so I'd say if you're recommended a brush, I'd probably avoid it because it wasn't anything that I really use, but you might, who knows. Now, as far as what's going to happen with these bees going into the future, I'm going to try my best to always have 3 levels on my bees, especially when the nectar and the pollen levels are high. So during spring and summer, I'll always make sure that there's 3 boxes, and this will allow the bottom level to be dedicated to brood and laying the eggs for the queen, the middle box to be the storage for the bees and all of the resources that they need to keep them safe, to feed their babies, to feed their queen. And then the top box is for honey and extracting, which I don't think I'll ever be greedy enough to use all of the frames at the top, but you never know. So it's always a good idea to give them plenty of storage first before I take anything for ourselves. Bees are pretty simple. Don't overthink it. You really do learn a lot as you go, and I feel like I've learned more about my bees and how to look after them and care for them since I've had them, rather than all of the information I gained from watching videos and reading books. So the best way to learn, especially for me, and it might be for you as well, is just to jump in, get all of those basics done, get your registration, join a local beekeeping club, get a mentor if you can, and then just keep your eyes open and get ready to learn, because you're going to learn a lot. I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Slavia, who just donated 5 coffees to us on Buy Me a Coffee. Thank you so much for your support. We so greatly appreciate any help we can get in this journey. It really helps us to pay for all of the animals that I keep buying on our property and all of their feed, and helping us to keep learning, keep growing, and to teach you guys as much as we can.